global movement defending children's rights to their mother and father. Katy publishes, speaks, and testifies widely on why marriage and family are matters of justice for children. Her articles have appeared in Newsweek, USA Today, The Federalist, Public Discourse. Think of just about any publication you can think of, or legitimate website, mostly Christian websites, but others as well, and she has been published and well recognized there. She's on the advisory board for the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship. She's also helped design the teen edition of Canavox, which studies sex, marriage, and relationships from a natural law perspective, and has produced how many videos? I mean, bunches and bunches of videos just providing practical, biblically based insight to help adults, but also to help children understand how to navigate this really complex world that they're living in, and those resources are so valuable. She's an author and has detailed her philosophy of worldview transmission in her book, Raising Conservative Kids in a Woke City. She'll tell you more about that, I imagine. Her third book, Pro-Child Politics, was just published in September and is available at Amazon and all other booksellers. So certainly check into that and avail yourself of that. Katy speaks with great authority. She's a dear friend. She and her husband are raising their 4 children in Seattle, Washington, of all places. And so she said she felt very comfortable and at home today with the weather that we had. But is just an incredible person. I know among the Family Policy Council network, Katy is one of the superstars. And she is literally a national, not only national, but international expert and very sought after on many of the issues that we've talked about. So, Katy, would you please come share with us? Thank you.
I'm a big fan of NC Family. A big fan of NC Family for a couple reasons. I work with a lot of different policy councils across the country. Some are not very effective. Some are incredibly effective. You happen to have one of the latter here in this state in terms of understanding the issues at play, but it's not enough to just have the right message. You have to have the right method. You have to communicate those ideas well, and you have to establish trusted relationships with the policymakers in your state. And I will tell you, among the dozens of family policy institutes that we have an opportunity to work with, you actually have a powerhouse here. And so I'm going to talk with you. Hopefully by the time I'm done talking, you're going to start making the connections between our work and all of the policy that NC Family is working to advance. And then you will give them lots and lots of money. Because everything that they are doing ultimately comes down to, are you going to protect or are you going to victimize children? Ultimately, that is really what all this boils down to. So let me tell you a little about who I am. I, 15 years ago, was doing exactly 0 work on any of these issues. I was a stay-at-home mom. I was a pastor's wife. I didn't have any kind of education or background that would lead you to think, hey, honestly, what I was doing 4 hours ago was leading a workshop for a committee on the family at the United Nations earlier today. So I don't have a degree that would set me up for something like that. And I don't necessarily have the disposition that says, I want to get involved in the most contentious culture war issues of our day. When I'm talking about, generally who I am on an ordinary day, on that spectrum, that Christian spectrum of truth teller and grace giver that all of us fall somewhere on, I am actually a grace giver. I just want to keep the peace. I don't like to ruffle feathers. I like to keep my friends. But there is something that tips me over the edge, something that gets me off the couch and pulls me out of my silence on social media. That thing is child victimization. When you come for the kids, something inside of me roars. And I position myself between that threat and the kid. And I say, oh, you're coming for the kids? You're going through me. And you won't get through. So I first began being engaged on the culture war issues on the matter of marriage. A lot of you guys have been fighting on behalf of children for decades when it comes to their fundamental right to life. I was still sort of a non-participant in the policy world until the issue of marriage came up. And that was something that was a little earlier on the docket for Washington State compared to the rest of the nation. And what I heard advocates of gay marriage advancing was this idea that kids don't care if they have two moms or two dads. Now, if you're a thinking person, what that actually means is kids don't care if they've lost their mom or dad. Because when you're looking at a picture of a child with two dads, you're looking at a picture of a child who has lost their mother. And when you're looking at a picture of a child with two mothers, you are looking at a child who has lost their father. Now, I've been working with youth in some capacity for nearly 3 decades, and I will tell you the thing that children care about. And it is whether or not their mother and father loves them, and whether or not their mother or father loves each other. And if there was a 7-year-old here, on that call at the United Nations that I had earlier today, one of the other speakers was going to be at an event where they had 70 kids that were going to come and they were going to speak about the things that mattered to them, like carbon taxes and climate change and DEI and equity. And that is not what kids care about. That is what adults want to use children as mouthpieces for, so they can advance an adult-centric agenda. If there was a child here today, unprompted, a 9-year-old standing here on this stage, and you ask them what they want, they will say, I want my mom and dad to love me, and I want my mom and dad to love each other. It is the organic, natural, God-given desire of every child. And when children lose that to tragedy, or because one or both parents fails to do hard things on their behalf, very often it inflicts a lifelong wound on kids. And you know that if you've worked with kids. I mean, personally, I've been, up at 3 a.m. at the lock-in on the gym floor with the kid. And what is it they want to talk about when everybody else is asleep? Where's my dad? Why did he leave? Does he love me? Does he think about me? Why did my parents break up? Was it my fault? I thought everything was great. But now it's like I have to only see my dad every other weekend, right? Now at Them Before Us, one of the things that we do is we catalog the stories of children who experienced mother or father loss. And very often, I will talk to people in their 40s or 50s or 60s that have never really expressed, never really been able to disclose the pain that they experienced. And you get 55-year-old high-powered lawyers crying on the phone about the fact that they never knew a dad and they always hungered for a father. This is fundamental innate human longings. And so I started to push back. I decided to start writing about the importance of mothers and fathers and why kids needed moms and dads. And thank God, he let me work a lot of this out in relative obscurity. I started by writing an anonymous blog because I'm a chicken. And I know what these people will do to you if they find you. And so as I started to do some research, I realized, I knew that kids needed a mom and dad. I didn't actually know they had a natural right to a mom and dad. Before I had kids, I was the assistant director of the largest Chinese adoption agency in the world. So I knew that adoption was an institution established upon the best interest of the child. But when I started writing, I did not know that there was a separate industry, the big fertility industry, that was working to create children and award them to unrelated adults completely outside of those best interests that adoption had established for decades. I knew that mothers and fathers offered distinct and complementary benefits to children. But I didn't know that there was evidence that the loss of one or both affected children's physical health, mental health, emotional health, academic health, and relational health. And then a very tolerant gay blogger outed me, discovered my identity, and doxed the members of my church, published their names and addresses on his very large blog with a huge following to get me to shut up. And it nearly worked. Because as you know, people can call you names and it hurts your feelings. But when they come for your kids, when they come for your friends, when they come for your job, it's easy to say, okay, you got me, I'll stop. But thankfully, the good men at my church, of which my husband was the pastor and surrounded by good elders, said, no, I think you go big. We've got this. I'm like, okay. So it ultimately ended up being a what the enemy means for evil kind of story. Because now, instead of just behind my keyboard, I could lead workshops at the United Nations. I could submit amicus briefs to the Supreme Court. I could advocate on behalf of children in Australia, South Carolina, Albania, the Czech Republic, and Rome. God allowed my platform to expand 100-fold, not necessarily by choice, but by his will. So as I started to advocate on behalf of children in the family, the recognition that they have a right to their mother and father, and it is their rights that must determine our course of action both personally and politically, I started to see that it wasn't just areas of marriage and family where children were being victimized. In fact, I started to look at all the culture war issues, and I realized, wait a second. Every single culture war battle that we are facing today ultimately comes down to, are you going to protect kids? Or are you going to victimize them? And I'll boil it down fairly simply into 4 fundamental areas of child protection. Protecting children's life, protecting children's family, protecting children's minds, and protecting children's bodies. And what you're going to see is NC Family is hitting all of them. So children's life. Most of you are not surprised to hear that children's life is under attack by the baby-taking industry of abortion. It is one of the greatest, it's virtually a Holocaust in our nation of human loss and suffering and systematic elimination of an entire people group that has been dehumanized and their rights have been violated as a result. That is and continues to be a major threat to children. But there's also a new front on the war to defend children's right to life. It is not the baby-taking industry of abortion. It is the baby-making industry of IVF. Many of you may be unaware that IVF destroys more embryonic life every year than Planned Parenthood does. That there are hundreds of thousands, probably millions of children produced every year through the process of IVF, in vitro fertilization, making babies, fertilizing them in glass, and maybe 2 to 7% are born alive. The vast majority of those lab-created babies will be sex-selected out of existence. They won't make the grade. They grade embryos. And if you're not an A-grade embryo, medical waste, donation to research. Many of the embryos that do make the grade are going to be subjected to genetic screening. The ones that are deemed fit, but not necessarily useful right now, will be frozen. And many times they don't ever emerge. Right now we have 1.5 million embryos on ice. And so if we believe that life begins at conception, which is not only the biblical but the biological explanation for when life begins, we will fight both the baby-making industry and the baby-taking industry. Children's right to life is under attack now more than ever. What about children's family? Children have a fundamental right to be known and loved by both their mother and father. Our first book, Them Before Us, Why We Need a Global Children's Rights Movement, details exactly why that is. and why that helps and must drive our decision-making on things like the definition of marriage, divorce, modern families, third-party reproduction, surrogacy, and even why adoption must be properly understood as a matter that advances the well-being of children. It is not for adults. Children's right to their mother and father is under attack. Under attack by cultural forces that seek to normalize motherless and fatherless homes through phrases like, kids don't need moms and dads, they just need to be safe and loved. Phrases like, biology doesn't matter, love makes a family. Phrases like, if the adults are happy, the kids will be happy. Phrases like, kids are resilient. And really, all of those phrases is just a cultural permission slip for adults to do whatever they want and for kids to have to just stick it and deal with the consequences. Unfortunately, those cultural phrases do real damage to children's right to their mother and father. There's also been a legal overhaul related to children's rights in the family. First, the unraveling of marriage by removing the expectation of permanence from that union through the passage of no-fault divorce. Then, the removal of the expectation of complementarity in marriage by instituting gay marriage, saying you no longer need a male and female, you can have 2 men or 2 women. We are now moving into a world where marriage is going to be stripped of the expectation of monogamy, where there's only going to be 2. There is now a very high degree of approval for polyamory and polygamy, with about 34% of Americans saying that they prefer relationships or feel like a not strictly monogamous relationship is right for them. So polyamory and polygamy are both on the rise. So we're seeing cultural, legal threats to children's rights in the family, but we're also seeing technological threats. That ability to make babies in a laboratory doesn't just put their lives at risk, it puts their family at risk. Because once you're making a baby in a laboratory, there's really no need to just use the gametes of the man and woman the baby's going home with. It's just as easy to use somebody else's sperm or somebody else's egg, and these days, somebody else's womb. And so what you're getting is the intentional separation of children from their mother or father at the moment of conception through commercial and technological processes. Those children end up disproportionately struggling with identity issues because it's very hard for kids to answer the question, who am I? If they can't answer the question, whose am I? So we see that children's rights in the family are greatly at risk. Now, parental rights has rightly been in the spotlight. They are absolutely under attack. They must be defended because the child's own mother and father are statistically the most connected to, invested in, and protective of them. If we really want children to be safe and loved, if we want them to thrive, if we want them to be able to formulate a holistic, stable identity, we will protect their right to their mother and father, and we will protect parents' rights to their own children. What we see is when we properly identify children's rights and parental rights, they perfectly complement and reinforce one another. We have to do both. Defend children's rights to their parents, parents' rights to their children, and thereby defend children's families. So their life is under attack, their family is under attack, but also their minds are under attack. Children have a right to innocence. They are not miniature adults walking around able to handle all of the different heavy load, challenging subjects, graphic material that we adults are able to. There is a reason why we have rating systems on movies, because you don't want the 11-year-old watching the XXX or even the R-rated movie. We understand that it will damage them and disturb them. Sometimes those kids are not able to shake those images. Sometimes it genuinely traumatizes them. But these days, we are attacking children's minds, their innocence, through things like comprehensive sex ed curriculum, through things like drag queen story hour, through things like pornographic library books that are being pushed on children, often without their parents' knowledge. We are victimizing children's mind when we should be protecting children's minds. Children also have a right to their bodies, bodies that are intact and unmedicalized. Obviously, that is drastically under threat by supposed transgender treatments, right? Transgender treatments do not turn boys into girls. They turn healthy boys into lifelong consumers of plastic surgery and pharmaceuticals. They turn healthy children into medical patients. That's what they do. What these transgender treatments are is the making of a child who is well into a child who is sick. Puberty blockers poison a child's system. Cross-sex hormones are a chemical cocktail that stunt children's growth. They don't just block the development of a child's secondary sex characteristics. They block brain development, lung development, bone development. Children who have been given these transgender chemical treatments have brittle bones, memory loss, heart and lung issues because they have stymied the second largest developmental phase that humans go through, and that is puberty. And you do not get that back. Children's bodies also deserve safe play. They deserve to be on sports teams where they are competing only against boys or girls. Girls especially deserve sex-segregated locker rooms, bathrooms, and changing rooms. Their bodies are vulnerable, and they deserve to be protected in those spaces. So as I've been talking, I'm sure you're thinking, NC Family's doing a lot of that work. And the answer is yes, they are. Yes, they are. So the thing is that kids can't defend themselves. They have fundamental rights. They have needs. Their well-being must be protected. But they don't speak at family policy dinners. They don't lead UN workshops. They don't write amicus briefs. They rely on us to do that for them. We have to speak up on their behalf. And when we don't, they are victimized. Now, I know that a lot of you guys have been sold the lie that these are political issues and Christians shouldn't get involved in politics. And the answer is, that is not true. Children need protection. And I will tell you the one demographic that has always given it to them when they're under threat in nearly every way. Do you know what that demographic is? It's Christians. I think a lot of us are rightly horrified by the kind of child victimization that we are seeing today. Indeed, it's what got me off the couch and onto the computer to keyboard warrior. Right? When I saw kids being victimized, that was enough to snap me into action. Because I'd never seen the normalization of mother or father loss in the name of progress before. There's probably other areas that have red-pilled you, where you said, whoa, you're telling me that 52-year-old man can play on the girls' college basketball team? Oh, no. Now we fight, right? There's always something that is enough. The progressive left has gone so extreme that it has forced a lot of us to get off the couch into the voting booth or at the NC Family Dinner. And that's exactly as it's supposed to be, especially if you're a Christian. We have been in a somewhat luxurious spot where we've taken for granted that children are vulnerable, that they're made in the image of God, that they deserve protection, and that they do need this kind of buffer put around them from adults that would seek to harm them. That has not always been the case. The first century church was born into a world of rampant child victimization. Things like abortion were commonplace. Infant exposure, where they would discard unwanted, disabled, or female children, was routine. Children were hypersexualized and unfortunately used as sexual objects if they were a part of the household of a strong landowning male. Children were mutilated through turning them into things like eunuchs to serve in wealthy households. They were commodified to pay off a family debt and serve as slaves temporarily or permanently. It was a world that didn't even believe, the Roman world didn't even consider children to be fully human until they could walk or talk. And then something happened a couple thousand years ago. This Savior was born, inhabited the body of an infant, dignified children by becoming one of them. And then he started teaching his followers things like, oh, don't inhibit the children from coming to me. Bid them, I welcome them, I want them. They would ask him things like, hey, what's up with heaven? How do we get there? And he'd say things like, you have to become like a kid. You have to become like a little child. And then he would warn them. See these little ones? You cause them to stumble? I've devised this method of cruel and unusual punishment for you. In essence, that was Christ saying, children are fully members of the human species, made in the image of God, just like everyone else, despite how old or young, how able or disabled they are, whether they can walk or talk. And if you hurt them, you deal with me. Further, the Christian sexual ethic was so wildly distinct from the pagan world. The pagan world that created all kinds of fatherless children because free landholding men could have sex with whoever they wanted and create babies outside of the marital union as often as they liked. The Christian sexual ethic said, no, you have sex only with your husband or your wife. So every child born according to this ethic always had the protection and love of both their mother and father for life. So the Christian world didn't have fatherless children, starving and hungering for male affection, vulnerable to all kinds of victimization. And as a result, the early Christians outbred the pagans because it was such a child-friendly and female-friendly worldview. The Christians' advent into the pagan world so dignified children, so protected children, and created such conditions for child thriving that many sociologists posit that Christianity invented childhood. And that's exactly the attitude that we need to bring into America 2024. We actually need to get back to our historical Christian roots. We need to return to the place where we understand that child protection is and always has been a manifestation of our pure and undefiled religion before God. It is not a political issue. It is fundamentally an aspect of our faith lived out. It is part of the works that we reveal through our genuine saving faith. Christians and child protection have always gone hand in hand. Do not let anybody silence you, shame you into shrinking back from these fundamental issues that primarily have to do with child protection. And I will tell you, I understand that there is a cost. There is certainly a social cost. There's sometimes a professional cost. But be very honest if you choose to refuse to speak up on behalf of kids. Just be honest. You're saying, I prefer my social acceptance above guarding the demographic that Christ says has a cherished position in his kingdom and who charged you with their protection. Child protection and everything, life, family, mind, and body, all the things that NC Family is working on, all the things that, yes, things can get a little heated at Thanksgiving dinner over these issues. Be gracious. Your method matters just as much as your message. But you cannot shrink back from speaking the message. Because if we don't stand up, if we don't speak up, if we don't advocate on behalf of children, they will be victimized. And according to our Savior and our God, that is a non-option for Christians. We are charged with child protection. So let's talk a little bit about the election. The ticket that won the White House, I was very disappointed to see that they softened, they weakened, and they compromised on two primary child rights: their right to life and their right to their mother and father. However, they're very clear on a child's right to innocence by advancing school choice, by understanding that education needs to be decentralized. It is not a function of the federal government. It is a function of parents. It's a function of districts. It's a function of states. They are elevating school choice, which ultimately correlates to protecting children's right to innocence because it gives parents power. I really believe that one of the biggest winning issues for the Trump-Vance ticket was children's right to an intact, unmedicalized body. This is the issue. Our 2 + 2 = 5 issue, where even normie, ordinary, non-political, even liberal, progressive Democrats say, I don't actually want a boy competing against my daughter in track, right? This is the one that was so self-evident that we even got people on the left to say, you're right about that. And I will tell you that this ticket is incredibly strong when it comes to protecting children's bodies. But I will tell you what I think is even more hopeful. And it is that I think that what happened in the election was an absolute rebuke of woke ideology. Woke ideology, which from Katy's layperson perspective, is just identifying people primarily according to a group identity and then pitting one another against each other, right? And it was a rebuke to that ideology that ultimately, when you elevate group identity and then assign everybody status of victim and victimizer, oppressor or oppressed, ultimately, that harms children the most. So to me, what I see in what just took place in the election was a closer return to an embrace of reality. Like the good lady at my table was saying today, a return to common sense. Common sense. What is common? What is known? What is self-evident, right? And anytime you have an organization, a polity, a political ticket moving closer to reality, biological, constitutional, historical, economic, you will then also be able to advance realities. Like marriage actually is the unity of a mother and father because children have a right to both. You will have to understand the reality of embryology and the inherent dignity of children at every age and every ability. So I'm very hopeful for this election. I'm very hopeful for the fruits of what is going to come because we now do have the executive and the legislature. I am hopeful that common sense is going to return and that common sense is going to redound to the benefit of children. I will say, on the issue of life and family, do not bend. These things, that children have a right to life, that they have a right to their mother and father, they do not change. They do not change because the GOP platform no longer recognizes them as true. They don't change because 5 Supreme Court justices decided that marriage is a union of any two people. They don't change because we repeat, love makes a family, or women have a right to reproductive justice. These truths about children were true 2,000 years ago, they're true today, and they will be true 2,000 years from now. These are fundamental child realities that we either recognize and respect, or we victimize kids. We do not let any kind of politician or current administration shape us. We, those who understand the fundamental rights and well-being of children, we influence them, okay? There's going to be influence one way or the other, and it is not going to work in reverse. Regardless of what political parties say in their platform about life and marriage, we will forsake children if we go along with the new put your finger in the wind and figure out where the political winds are blowing. We don't do that. We stand firmly on the rights of children to life, to family, to mind, to body. And then we insist that everybody, whether it's a distorted culture, a rampant, out-of-control technological world, or even our own party, come back to us. We don't go to them. And I will promise you this. I will promise you this. When you are on the side of child protection, you will never be on the wrong side of history. So keep standing firm for children and support NC Family. Thank you.